Greetings, Ohio Valley. This is Dan Lima with OSU Extension from Belmont County.
And this is Karen Cox from WVU Extension in Ohio County. Thanks for tuning in to Extension Calling, your source for research-based information for the farm, garden, and home. Dan is away on military leave right now, so we're going to bring back some of our previous shows that didn't make it to the podcast. We hope that you enjoy them. As always, we welcome your feedback. If you'd like a written transcript of the show, please email me at Karen, Karen, .cox, COX, at mail, MAIL, .wvu.edu, or call 304-234-3673. Thanks again for listening. COVID-19 vaccines are available to West Virginians in all 55 counties. To find COVID-19 vaccines near you, visit vaccinate.wv.gov. You can also call the West Virginia COVID-19 info line at 1-833-793-0965. Again, that's vaccinate.wv.gov or 1-833-793-0965 to find your COVID-19 vaccine.
And with that, we are going to talk a little bit. I found a really great article that was a lot of fun to read, and I was going to share it with you on here. It's from the Hay and Forage Grower, and it was written by Mike Rankin, and it's called Why Grazing is Like Baseball. And I really enjoyed it, and he made some really great points, and I was hoping that you would humor me by listening to them today. All right, so number one is that both are summer sports, right? So grazing is only possible when the grass is growing, warm temperatures, moisture, and baseball is April to November. So to maintain a profitability, successful grazing operation needs to stretch its season, just like baseball did. And that's often done through stockpiling forages or planting annuals for the late fall and winter grazing. Number two, they're both played on grass. The importance of good grass to both grazing and baseball is obvious. A lack of good grass will drastically impact your final score. Always strive for good grass. Both require a high level of skill and strategy, and I am kind of paraphrasing most of this, so if you want the full article, definitely check out hayandforage.com. All right, so both require a high level of skill and strategy. You're hitting a tiny ball flying 95 miles through the air with a little tiny bat. That's pretty difficult, but also a successful grazier has to have a good eye for both cattle and grass and be able to figure out which is the best way to swing, because what may be best for the grass may not be what's best for the cattle at that time of year. And rotational grazing is a constant exercise of in-game strategy, reacting not only to the changing weather, but also the grass growth and what your cow's nutritional needs are. So it's not necessarily the easy plan, but with effort and practice, you're going to get very good performance results. And conditioning is important. So major league teams have a 12-month conditioning program, and you need to be planning for the condition of your pasture 12 months out of the year as well. A pasture that's out of condition due to lack of soil fertility or being overgrazed is going to give you underconditioned and poor performing cattle. So definitely know what you need to do to keep your pastures in good condition. Also know when to change pitchers. Knowing when to change a pitcher is key in the decision of any baseball game. So knowing when to move your cattle to a new paddock or pull the cattle off of something is an equally important decision. Number 6, errors can cost you. Can definitely cost you in the game of baseball, but in the grazing arena, overgrazing is probably the most common error. So errors can definitely cost you the game or your profit margin. Slumps are part of the game. Baseball players, even the best ones, go through slumps sometime during the season, and your grasses are going to do the same. So you need to expect them and plan for them. You know, on a baseball team, they switch out the players, so you need to have something you can switch out to when your grasses are in a slump as well. Some of them even recommend to pull your animals off once we hit that dry season in September. If you have mostly cool season grasses, pull them off and let those grasses grow back up, and then you can start grazing on them again once the temperatures drop off. That allows those grasses to keep that root structure strong and allows you to make sure that there's a good, strong protein content in what your animals are feeding later on in the season. And that's especially important if you are a fall calving organization and you want to make sure you have those high protein contents available for those young calves. All right, so good bullpen and bench is essential. In the case of rotational grazing, there's going to be times where your base perennial pastures need to be pulled from the game, at least temporarily. You have to make sure you're preserving, I'm getting there, preserving their future performance. All right. So, and good equipment, good equipment goes a long way. It saves you time, it saves you stress, and it definitely gets you better results. For example, strong energizer coupled with quality polywire and posts and reels is just as important as a good ball glove and a good bat. And finally, they're both long seasons. With any luck, your grazing season will be a long one, just like baseball, but there's some off-season planning you have to do in order to make sure that you get success throughout the entire grazing season. So make sure, even in those winter months, that you have a plan in place for those extreme weather conditions, drought, as well as normal slumps. When you're planning ahead for things, everything seems to work out better. So I just thought that was a pretty good article and it was fun. So I hope you enjoyed it as well. All right. I also wanted to talk to those of you who are doing some corn silage this year and just give you a heads up on some things to look out for. And mostly we're trying to help you prevent mycotoxin buildup in your corn silage, your grain corn silage. All right, so in the region, these moist conditions, again, last week I talked a lot about tomato blights and downy mildew and all sorts of terrible things that are affecting our vegetable growers. Well, it's going to come down and hit our livestock growers as well, because when you have persistent moist conditions, those fungi get into all sorts of different plants, including your corn ears and your stalks. Subsequently, you can get toxin contamination. So the most prevalent ear rots in this region are Diplodia ear rot and Gibberella ear rot. Diplodia affects quality and yield, but Gibberella is a real concern as it can be associated with the production of mycotoxin. I'm not going to pretend I can pronounce the mycotoxin it produces, but it goes by DON or vomitoxin. All right, so the fungus that causes the Gibberella ear rot and stalk rot is the same fungus that causes scab in wheat and barley. So if you have that in your rotation, then you could be potentially perpetuating the disease problem and making it worse, increasing the potential presence of mycotoxin in your stored grain and silage. All right, so you also need to be cautious if you're using dried distiller's grains in the ration because it can be more concentrated in the distilled byproduct. Another factor to consider is straw that's used for bedding can also harbor this mycotoxin, and so you want to make sure that you are removing any of the leftover stalks that are in the field where they could persist over the winter. All right, so the question is always, will it be a bad year for Gibberella ear rot? And those cool, wet conditions at the time of silking will favor the sporulation or the spread of the fungus. So basically that means there's more inoculum available to enter and infect the silks. And once that infection happens, if you have to delay harvest and there's still lots of moisture, that's going to enable the continued growth of the fungus. And so that is, each of those things is going to increase the risk for this ear rot. So you definitely want to be watching for it, checking out your ears, making sure there's no mold on them. And there are a lot of online sources available to help you identify all of the different ear rots and ear molds. But if you don't have access to the internet or you're not a computer person, Extension is out there to help you. So make sure you are reaching out to your local Extension service. Also, fungicides. Can you use fungicides to help? And unfortunately, the answer to that is no. They have done several studies that definitely need more research to do them. But the studies, while they could reduce the ear rot, it actually did not reduce the amount of mycotoxin that was present. So right now, with the fungicides we do not have a sufficient preventative agent for the mycotoxin buildup. All right, so if you have contaminated feed or you suspect you have contaminated feeds, you definitely want to test it and not regret it. So make sure that if you think you may have some contaminated feed, that you do test it before you feed your animals and have thousands upon $1,000 worth of loss. All right, so to avoid the Don mycotoxin problem, you definitely want to look into corn hybrids that have a genetic resistance to the ear mold fungi. Unfortunately, that's not really what people advertise when they're talking about their corn. They want you to know it has foliar disease resistance. So what you're going to look for is stalk strength or standability, because a lot of times, especially the gibberella, the same fungi that causes the ear rot is what causes the stalk rot. So you're going to look with corn that has features to protect the grain inside the husk, because any openings is where fungus gets in. So hybrids with downward turning tend not to let in as much moisture through the tip, and those with husks that consistently cover the tip protect that grain from those invaders. You also want hybrids that have insect resistance to prevent feeding wounds, again, keeping it sealed up against a potential fungus invasion. You can always work with your seed rep or your extension agent to help you find a good hybrid variety that addresses this if you are planning to feed your corn as silage. Also, making sure that you're doing good insect management in the field, that you are protecting those husks and keeping them tightly covered so that no fungi can get into the actual corn itself. Now, this fungus, the gibberella fungus, does overwinter in, like I said earlier, in infected straw stalks. So making sure you're bailing off that straw and the leftover fodder definitely will not hurt you and could help in preventing the buildup of this particular fungus in your fields. And of course, always crop rotation for non-host species is always, for any disease management, you want to make sure that you are rotating out your susceptible hosts. Now, another thing that we don't talk too much about, but I want to make sure that, we give you guys some support out here through the radio program, is our dairy producers. When we have a lot of rain and it's just really wet, you get a lot of runoff that go through the barn and wash into your storage pits. And when your manure storage has a lot of rain in it, it waters it down. And if it's not agitated, you're actually going to get different layers of nutrient levels in that. So it becomes a really challenging game to figure out, okay, how much should I spread to properly amend my soils? And where can I put this excessive moisture content that is building up? Because you definitely don't want to go into the winter with a full storage facility. You want to make sure you have the opportunity to spread that. But again, you want to avoid compacting your soil, by spreading during a wet situation. So you really want to, think about, okay, most farms are going to have about a 6-month capacity for storage. So you want to think about, okay, if it rains every day in November and December like it did last year, what am I going to do? And am I going to run into a situation where I don't have the ability to spread it because the ground is simply too soft? One of the things you can do definitely is make sure that you are protecting your barn area from runoff. So you have gutters on the barns that are directing the roof water away from the barn itself so that you're not collecting all of that water from the roof and then having to manage it as if it were manure. That's still great surface water, and you can run it off away from your animal areas, and it's going to dry out their area, make your animals healthier and happier, but also reduce the storage requirements for your nutrient management facility. You also want to, and that goes for beef cattle as well as dairy cattle. Anytime you have a nutrient storage facility, rainwater collection and diversion is the key to making sure that it's going to work for the amount of time that you need it to work for over the winter. And again, you've got that area at the top, your freeboard. You need to make sure you're maintaining that vertical height between the manure level and the top edge of your storage structure. So if you do have a heavy rainfall, that creates an emergency situation, that you are prepared for that to prevent an overflow. So if you're near that freeboard level, you really need to make some plans to spread some amount of your manure to bring it down to safe levels. Now, when the soil is dry, that's a great time to spread because you're not going to worry about compacting your soil. But the problem is that a lot of areas have viable crops on them right now, and you can't go spraying manure on a viable crop, especially if you're going to feed it to people. So you are going to be looking at options where small grains were maybe recently harvested, some hay fields, pastures that are not in current rotation. Actually, a nice nitrogen application to a pasture field this time of year is a good startup for your winter grazing area, where you are storing up that for pasture for winter. So a good late summer application of manure could definitely improve your rotational grazing opportunities later on, say November, December time. All right, so also, maybe if you have a short season corn silage variety that can be harvested, and you can put it down after that's harvested. And if you have this problem perpetually, like every couple years you have an issue where you have a lot of water that is collecting and you need to spread early, you may want to consider planting short season corn silage simply for that extra time period to spread before winter comes on. Again, planning ahead, making little tweaks here and there just to make things that much easier and that much better. But the trick is when you are spreading your manure, if you have had a large water influx, you need to know what the current nutrient content of what you're spreading is. Or if you're drawing from the bottom, it's probably going to be stronger than what's at the top if it's in a non-agitated system, simply because your solids are going to sink. And so trying to have an agitated system where you have an even management of what the nutrient content is versus making sure you're testing it frequently so that you know exactly what you're putting out on the fields, because you don't want a case where you're putting on too much potassium and it's leaching down through the soil and causing a problem. All right, another problem is when you're trying to spread this time of year, it's hot. And we all know that our nitrogen is going to volatilize on these hot days. So it's very important to try to find a field that has a cover crop on it, so that cover crop can try to grab some of that nitrogen before it volatilizes and goes out into the atmosphere. You want to make sure that you are, if it's not currently covered in a cover crop, that it is going to be covered in a cover crop, so that you can avoid that wintertime leaching loss as well. And anytime you have bare soil, and I don't care what it is, I don't care if it's a pipeline that just went through your property, get that bare soil covered as quickly as you can. And maybe some of the dairy farmers can help out with some of the other farmers who maybe need some extra nutrients on those pipelines that just went through to get a good coverage, because topsoil, now granted it's probably not topsoil there if it wasn't done properly, but topsoil is probably a farmer's most valuable resource. Without good quality topsoil, a farmer can't grow anything. Topsoil, it takes a good 7 years to reestablish a good quality topsoil that has a proper nutrient balance and a proper microbe balance. So you don't want your most valuable resource to be washing away in the wintertime. So using a cover crop is essential for that. If you can't get a cover crop started, then definitely cover it with some landscape fabric or some row cover. Anything is better than nothing. Some straw, or just don't allow that bare soil to wash away or blow away over the winter. So again, while unloading a manure storage structure earlier than anticipated is never ideal, by managing your particular situation, by utilizing fields that have well-drained soils or fields that have living plant cover, you're going to remediate the unideal situation, for lack of better terminology there. All right, so I hope that you found that information useful. And to throw a little bit in for our high tunnel growers, we want to make sure that when you are managing your high tunnel, that you are preventing salt buildup. So soluble salts are going to increase within your high tunnel because there's no rain coming through your high tunnel to leach them out. So you definitely want to make sure you're watching for soluble salts because they can result in crop damage, especially for tomatoes and strawberries, which are two very popular crops to grow inside high tunnels. So you can limit the use of high salt fertilizers and manure-based compost, because that will allow a lot more. Adding high salt means you're going to get high salt in the end. So try to use low salt fertilizers, and also do an annual test for soluble salts on your soil. High tunnel plastics should be removed every 5th year and allow the soil to be rained on for 3 to 4 months. That will help dilute. Just like if you have a potted plant, and you just water it just enough to moisten the soil each time, eventually you get that white crust on the top of it. And it's the same concept. I mean, you're basically turning an exterior field into a potted plant. Now, it is not that it is in a container, so to speak, but you are not allowing those extra minerals to dissolve away with a little bit of extra water, which is what nature does with rainfall. So when it comes time to replace that plastic, maybe you don't want to get that plastic that's going to last you 10 years and just stick with the cheaper 5-year plastic, because you need to take it off in 5 years anyway to let the soil rest and recover and get those salts out of it. So again, another problem we have a lot with high tunnels is, figuring out what to grow. That's always a challenge, because by adding a high tunnel, you increase the cost of that input. So you've installed a building, and that building now has cost to it, even if it is just a temporary building like a high tunnel. And so that soil underneath that high tunnel is now more valuable. So you need to put your most profitable crop in there to get its extended season. And unfortunately, I can't tell you what that is because it is completely and totally determined by your local market. So you have to check with the market. When does the first influx of tomatoes come to market? Come through Captina like 2 weeks ago, tomatoes were going at 10 pounds for $1 to $5.50 for your number twos, or $3.50 to $12 for a 10-pound box. Those prices are based on the fact that you had, 500, 600 boxes of tomatoes coming through. When those numbers are like 10 boxes, those prices are much, much higher. It's, supply and demand. When there's a huge supply, the demand can't keep up, prices go down. So if you can be the first person to market with your tomatoes, then that's where you're going to get your money back on your high tunnel. If you want to grow crop that will keep you through the winter and keep giving you cost back in the winter, that's another something to consider. But here's a number value for you. So any crop chosen for high tunnel production should gross at least $1.25 per square foot. So what are you looking at for there? So say you have 20 pounds of spinach a week planted in 80 square feet, and your average yield is 4 ounces per square foot per harvest. If you're doing lettuce, you're looking at 24, and that's 25 square feet, and your average yield being 1 head per square foot. Making sure you can get the $1.25 minimum. And now, again, that is, you got to make sure you're putting all of your inputs into your calculation. But carrots in 10 pounds per week, 6 carrots per pound, so you need 5 to 6 carrots per square foot. If cucumbers, if you get 25 per week, then and 5 cucumbers per plant, you need 5 plants. So that can help you with that. And high tunnel growers should also consider organizing. I'm a big advocate of cooperatives between farmers because that way you can reduce the input costs by buying in bulk. You can share labor and specialty equipment like row cover layers and things. Larger markets could be available by regional wholesaling, but you have to have the supply and produce that are consistent enough for larger buyers. All right, so if we are looking for some later fall crops, you can do Chinese cabbage from spring to winter. You can do Irish potatoes, summer, fall, and winter. You can do sweet potatoes in fall, winter. Keeping in mind, though, when you're harvesting sweet potatoes, the biggest mistake new farmers or farmers who are growing sweet potatoes for the first time make is that they don't let them cure long enough. Sweet potatoes need to cure at pretty high temperatures and pretty high humidity in order to set properly, or they do not keep. So if you're trying to grow something that'll keep, making sure that the crop has the proper curing period is definitely key. And with that, you are cured of my voice for this day, and I will let you go.
Do you have questions about the COVID-19 vaccination? Do you want to know who can get it, where to get it, or do you have general questions about COVID-19 vaccines? Vaccinate.wv.gov has the info you are looking for. You can also call the West Virginia COVID-19 vaccine info line to talk to a representative and find out more at 1-833-734-0965. Again, that's vaccinate.wv.gov or 1-833-734-0965 to get your COVID-19 vaccination questions answered. This message was brought to you by the WVU Extension Service. Thanks for listening to Extension Calling. This show is a collaboration between OSU Belmont County Extension Educator Dan Lima and WVU Ohio County Extension Agent Karen Cox. If you'd like a transcript of this show, contact us at the office. Also, let us know if you enjoy the show by ranking us on your podcast app.